this competitive market, blah, 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 laissez-faire, we'll talk more about it. The guy's actually an amazing guy. He's, really sophisticated. He opens his book with the story of the pin factory, and I'm going to ask you to explain this to me, and I will just explain it to you if you'll remember. He says, basically, and a pin, there's I'll elaborate a little bit because I know the economic history, but he says this in less than a few sentences. And a pin maker is essentially a person who makes nails. And this is like a tinker. These people were sometimes called tinkers. They would show up in your town, say around 1100. They would show up in your town, say Britain, and the guy has a pack on his back, and he shows up in your town, and he says, would you like a nail? And you say, yes. Now, people didn't have nails, right? It's hard to make a nail out of iron in those days. So the guy would sit down, take his pack off, he'd have a brazier there, he'd load it with coals, he'd fire up the coals, he'd get it really hot, he'd melt his various metals, he'd have tin and copper or whatever he needs for the nail, then the various things. He'd heat this stuff up, so that he got all the metals together. Then he'd somehow cool them and shake them and hammer them, smooth them and everything else. And at the end of the day, if he was really skilled, he'd produce 2 nails. And he'd show you these 2 nails and you'd be delighted, my God, 2 nails. This is incredible, right? And that's the way it was. Okay, now we go further in history. Again, about 200-300 years further on, every little town has one of these tinkers, lives in the town, and the guy makes nails. Exactly the same way, except he doesn't have to take his pack off and start everything up. So maybe in a day, he makes 5 nails, maybe. Doing this every day, he makes nails, and the people love it. Then we get to the proto-industrialization, which we call a particular thing called, we say the putting out system. Merchants will come along and they want a bunch of nails. So there's all these little towns, and every town has one of these guys making 5 nails. So the merchant brings them the metal on a Monday and comes back on Friday to get the nails that they've completed. So the merchant shows up on Friday and collects 25 nails from this town, 25 nails from the next town, and so on. And then, so this is the whole scene, nothing much has changed. They're using the same hammers and all the rest of it. And then, amazingly, the merchant gets them all in the same room. And they're in the same room, and they each get sitting at a little bench. And they sit at their benches, and there's these, say, 10 guys, each have a bench and away they go. And they make 5 nails a day. And then something happens. And Adam Smith says, when these people are together, they go from making one, he says, a person not skilled in this trade would scarcely make 1 nail a day. But these 10 guys in a room will make 48,000 nails a day. So my question to you is, how come they're making 48,000 nails a day, using the same hammers, the same razor, the same, kind of polishing agents and so on and so forth? How come they're making 48,000 nails? What's that secret? Tell me. Yeah, Eric, go ahead. What does that mean?
So like every person knows their own job, and next one, so it's almost like Monday is fast. And it's faster, so one person doesn't have to do all of it, and then we start the entire process.
Exactly. He calls it the division of labor. You know what? He says it's the key to civilization. It's what took us from the animal to civilized people. The division of labor. It's what allows us to be productive. If we were all making our own nails, that's all we ever made. But because we exchange with each other and we specialize and we divide up the labor, we become much more efficient. So he then says, he specifically says, look, what happens is what you see here. Number 1, once you can specialize, one person will do one task. So, for example, the weaving might be the hard thing, and Bill does the weaving, say, and he gets really good at it. And Alina does the spinning and the bleaching, and she gets good at it. So they're both better at it, rather than picking up, taking, because this tinker is just doing one thing after another, right? It doesn't get good at it. Then secondly, he says, and it saves you from moving from one task to another, which is a complete waste of time. So Alina doesn't have to worry about setting up and weaving Bill just does it all day long. He doesn't have to worry about going over to bleaching, because she does it, right? So they concentrate on one task, they specialize and get good at it. They don't have to move from one task to another. And then he actually said, which is really intriguing, and this leads to invention, because once you're doing the same job, you realize the repetition of the job, and you realize the secret is know how to do it better. Now, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of running, and that was before there was good on shoes. And so I used to wear 4 pairs of socks, because I didn't know I didn't want to wrap my legs. I write them anyway, it don't matter. So I used to wear 4 socks. And how do you think I put the socks on? Now, when you guys, I know everybody in this room said, how do you put your socks? You would say, well, I put my left sock on, I put my right sock on, I put my left shoe on, I put my right shoe on. And in fact, if you started wearing 4 socks, you'd go left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left shoe, left, right shoe. Until one day you wake up and go, wait a minute, this is stupid. Left sock, left sock, left sock, left sock, left shoe, right shoe, right shoe. And I'm out of there. Otherwise, it would take me 10 minutes to put my socks and shoes on. But I can do it in 2, right? But in all your life, you never think of that until you have those repetitions. So repetitions help you learn how to do things better. And then Smith says, by the way, what causes specialization is the size of the market. The bigger the market, the more specialization. The more productivity people are. So as the world expands and we trade more with each other, each of us becomes more productive because we're more specialized. The world has more goods, and that's the great thing about exchange and commerce and trade. Right? Okay, so back here. Now follow along. You blew that. Please don't blow it again in your life. You know, as they say, if you work with me and you can't work with me in a way, that's the whole secret of working. If you're working on a job site or doing anything, the 2 of you need to figure out a way that both of you can do more as a couple, so to speak, as 2 of you, than each of you can do alone. That's the secret, right? Okay, good. But now follow along, because we're making it to the next step. So this is the machine. Now if I get the 3rd person, what do you think? We've got 30, say, yards after 2 people. Now when I get the 3rd person, I've increased the number of people by 50%. Do you think we'll increase output by 50%, less than 50%, or more than 50%? What do you guys think? Think it out. In all honesty. How can you possibly think that you can pass the first 2 economic exam if you can't think of how to be more efficient in raking leaves? I'm taking you to the max here. Is there more than 50% or less than 50%? Answer. More than. Why? Tell me why. All right. In terms of Bill, we'll leave him doing this. Alina will do the spinning, and the new person will do the bleaching, which probably isn't quite so much work, and they'll run around and move things as well. So I would say, rather than get 45, which would be 50% more output, we get 60% more output. All right, now what about the 4th person? If we hire a 4th person, do you think we're going to get 33% more output? Or more or less? And what about if we hire a 5th person? And what about if we hire a 6th person? What starts to happen? Yeah.
Altogether, we would have less of a relative output.
Yeah. You'd have an increase in output. When I hire the 4th person, probably we'd have more output, but it wouldn't jump as much as when I hired the 3rd person. And when I hired the 5th person, we'd have more output, but it wouldn't jump as much as I hired the 4th person. Because, you know, everybody's lined up unless they're exhausted. You know, Bill falls and dies, then maybe it's going to work out. But essentially then, and imagine if I had 20 people and only these machines. Even if these people are desperate to work, there's only one guy can run the machine, one person can do the spinning, and one person that can die, one person can run around, one person can organize them, one person can feed them, one person, you know. But essentially, our output is not going to increase, and at some point, it's going to actually decrease. You can't move, you're tripping over other people, right? So, notice what you learned here. And I'm telling you, fundamentally, it's a fundamental idea. we found that, we're gonna define it this way. We're gonna say, total product. The total output increases for the most part. But the increase in output, the marginal product, how much more do you get from an additional worker, initially goes up because of specialization. And eventually goes down. Now I want you to give me a single reason why the product of an additional worker, as I hire more workers, initially goes up, and eventually as I hire more workers, the product of an additional worker goes down. I want one explanation for both of it, and that's everything. Lena. Yeah, but you're not thinking, you're just drawing. We don't have any marginal revenue yet. Just think about this. Why does the productivity of an additional worker initially go up and ultimately go down? The same explanation. What is it? What is causing all this behavior? Yeah.
There's only a fixed number of roles in the production.
Really close, but not quite there. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a fixed amount of land.
Because of the fixed amount of capital. Okay, ready? This is the basic secret of all cost functions we're going to deal with in the short run. The short run means what? What is the definition of the short run? Do you know? Capital is fixed. If capital is fixed, initially the productivity of an additional worker goes up, but eventually the productivity of the additional worker goes down. All right? So that gives us this fundamental diagram here, marginal product. Now here I describe it like this. These numbers here are drawn from this equation here. Notice it's a cubic equation. Don't worry about it. It's just, you need a cubic equation to get a marginal product, which is parabolic, that is, which has, like its highest exponent is 2, it's a square, right? But this all gets simpler. So now watch. This is our same cotton factor. In the first place, don't worry about the function that I have there. This is the information. The labor units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 workers. 1 worker produces 11. 2 workers produce 40. 3 workers, this is total product. 8 workers produce 256. 9 workers produce 243. So the first thing you notice, if I drew this like this, this is again the advantage of this thinking. Because now we're really in to the real exciting part of the course, I would say. Here, on this axis, I'm going to put T. Okay, on this axis, the vertical axis, we're going to do this way. That's strange. All right, on this one, this is output, Q, total output, total product. Here's the total product, all right? And here's labor, the quantity of labor, the quantity of LABOUR, quantity of labor right there, okay? And it turns out, if you look at the production function initially, it is going to look like this. Let's say start here, if I had it as a smooth curve. And it'll actually go something like this. Maybe it goes like this. This is total product. Notice? 1 worker produces this much. Oh, wait a minute. No, it doesn't actually look like this. It looks like this. Just blank. Something like that. That's what every total product function looks like for every firm on earth. Roughly, it has that shape, right? It would have that shape Because in the short run, for the short run, this is the short run for the product function, because the capital is fixed. Every single one, because I proved it to you. We discussed it. If capital is fixed, initially, there's not enough workers for the capital, and as more workers come in, they specialize, but eventually, there's too many workers for the capital, and they become less productive, right? That's the whole secret. Every single industry on earth is like that. There's no exception. How could there be? So when you look at this, what do you have to say about total product? I can show you this. You can sit down. When labor goes up, the more labor you have, the more output you go up, get. And eventually, with more labor, you don't get much more output. And that's kind of interesting. But it's not that interesting. Now, somebody who really knows what they're about would look at the shape here. And the shape is really interesting. Right? Because the shape shows that actually, notice initially, the marginal product, which we define as the change in output for the change in labor. So the marginal product initially for this worker is this. It's like a certain gain, but notice as I hire more workers, the slope represents the marginal product higher. And the next worker is even higher. So basically you can see, if I look at the slope, I can see output increases at an increasing rate, and then it increases at a decreasing rate until ultimately it might not increase at all, and in fact, it might actually decrease. The slope is the change in output for the change in labor, i.e. is the output of the last worker. Everybody? So, now notice, we could mess around with this marginal, this total product function, and we won't learn a whole lot. But a smart thing would be to do a marginal product function. So that's what we're going to do now. Hang on a second. This, now I'm going to change things. Now this is going to be the marginal product. So you know what this is? This is the output per unit of labor, right? It's not total output. It's the output per unit of labor. And this is the quantity of labor. But whereas before, what we would have had was, for example, this is the fourth unit of labor, the fourth worker. In this diagram right here, this is 4 workers. Everybody? 4 workers. This is the output of 4 workers. This, meanwhile, is the output of the 4th worker. Everybody? 1, the output of the 1st worker, the output of the 2nd worker, the output of the 3rd worker. And because of what we discovered, and drawing this as a smooth curve, it turns out the marginal product of labor, hang on a second, doesn't remember. The marginal product of labor would initially increase to say the 4th worker, and it decreases. And it would only be negative if, in fact, an additional worker resulted in a fall in output, such as right there. But otherwise, all the way along here, it's always positive. So we see, notice, marginal product is positive. Here it's an increase of 20, here it's an increase of 40, here it's an increase of 60, here it's an increase of 50, 30, 20. So long as there's an increase, total product is going up, even though the product of an additional worker is falling. So let me introduce you to this lovely graph, and we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, and then we'll continue with this. This graph is amazing. It is the marginal product in the short run. Now, when you say marginal product, you kind of mean the short run because we're looking at the change in output for an additional worker keeping capital fixed. That's what the marginal product really means. So notice, this fundamental idea, my claim to you, if you think about it, it's true everywhere, that for given capital, as you hire workers, an additional worker produces more than the previous worker up to a certain point as they specialize. But beyond a certain point, an additional worker becomes less productive. Now, first of all, no. It has nothing to do with the quality of the workers. They're all equally good workers. It has to do with the fact that capital is fixed. That's all it has to do with, right? So you can't really object to this. There's no objection to this. This is true, flat out true. But that thing there, understanding that that's true, that gives us the marginal cost function. And the marginal cost function gives us the supply function. That is the explanation of positive slope supply. I need to show you how to get there, because, well, we're not there yet. Now, one of the interesting things is that no firm will ever produce output, never be in the region. If they're in the region where marginal product is rising, they must shut down. They must shut down. So it turns out, most people, when they say this law, they call it the law of diminishing returns. Do you have any students who are in political science? Any friends in political science? Do you have that? Don't you guys mix with anybody? No, I wouldn't know a person in political science. I mean, my God, it would be disgraceful. It turns out there's people all over the place that talk about diminishing returns. Usually they mix it up with the idea of diminishing utility. Diminishing returns means simply this. It's in the short run. In the short run with fixed capital, as you add workers, eventually the output of an additional worker falls, and subsequent workers fall even more. Additional workers, even though the total output goes up. The law of diminishing returns. But in fact, it should be said as the law of eventually diminishing returns. Because initially, returns to an additional worker go up. It's only eventually that returns go down. Now, the intriguing thing is this. No firm on earth produces the output where returns are going up. Every firm on earth produces output where returns are going down. So it turns out, we're going to show you later, it's more restrictive even than this after the break. No firm on earth would ever produce this amount. They would never hire 1, 2, 3, or 4 workers. They would only hire workers if that worker's productivity was less than the previous worker. Now this is like weird, but it's not really weird. Okay? Let's take a quick break, 5 minutes, and we'll come back to it.
Actually, yeah. I think